which connected with Ukraine, and also after it, we also will have quote of Odarchenko, member of parliament, and after this on our Zoom program, we also quote of Abdul Patel about the conference and about practices in African continent and South Africa also, and also from Dina from Kazakhstan, also their conclusions, and maybe something else. So our Zoom program will be connected for 1 hour more, even it's late night, but thank you for patience. So what I firstly wanted to discuss with you is bills about Ukraine. So first question is, what is really Lend-Lease bill and how it will work, here in US? And what is really packages which needs to be passed every like 3-4 months in your parliament, because for Ukrainians it's also all people talking about Lend-Lease, but really almost nobody don't read like direct text of this bill which was voted. So let's start from this question. Yes, so what's the main important bill of advocacy for Ukraine, and who really must be in charge for this bill? Americans, or like Ukrainians must do more to lobby Ukraine and Ukrainian perspective? If so, how they can do this? So let's start maybe from Kendall, because you're a lawyer and you understand all this bill creating process. So please explain us what is Lend-Lease, how it will work, and really packages.
Well, what my focus has been up until pretty recently has been on what would be extended in terms of humanitarian assistance for Ukrainian refugees. And that has been sort of a striking example of very positive actions by the government, in my opinion. And there wasn't necessarily a traditional lobbying effort. For example, almost, just based on the administration's own thought processes, they, for a period of time, they allowed Ukrainians to come across the Mexican border, simply to come across it without anything other than the Ukrainian passport and maybe a 2-day computer check to see if the individuals were on Interpol's list. But people literally by the thousands walked across the border and would get a stamp when they came on the US side that said humanitarian parole. It's hard to think of anything that was extended so quickly like that by the US government. Our immigration services is a very complex and immensely frustrating bureaucracy. Nevertheless, it continued for days, for thousands. And that followed a temporary protective status measure by the administration, also benefit to Ukrainian refugees, but not reaching nearly so many people. And then the Biden administration developed a program for family sponsorship. There are 1 million Ukrainians or Ukrainian Americans in the United States, allowing them to come to the United States with a family sponsor. And when I read about this, I thought, great, it's going to be like all the other immigration programs where you apply for something and years later, maybe they get around to making a decision. But that hasn't been the case at all. In fact, I'm aware of a family, a typical family, well, not typical, but like many families of Ukrainian Americans in the US. They wanted to get the mother and the young sister into the United States. And the interview that was promised by the Immigration Service was May 2023. Great. When this bill, policy was enacted, though, they actually, from the time they submitted their request, their application for family sponsorship, approval was granted in 2 weeks. So I just want to begin the discussion of what the US can do by giving you perhaps a narrow perspective, where I've seen the administration perform admirably. And you know, it isn't always so easy in the immigration context for the US to provide direct assistance to Ukrainian refugees, because as we know, there are refugees from many countries, war-torn regions. There have been people that have tried to get into the US from Haiti, which is a huge humanitarian disaster over the years. And it hasn't been so easy. But I think in this instance, I am a Democrat, but the Biden administration really deserves some praise for the way they've stepped up and have helped many thousands, actually tens of thousands of people. And I think there will be more people in the future who get help from the administration's.
Can you please add also about these bills? And I also have many questions about the next steps of our work.
Sure.
Yeah.
The one thing that I wanted to talk about for a moment is the May 9th law on Lend-Lease,
Yes, sure.
which basically is based upon a previous concept from last century, where the Biden signed a law that through fiscal year 2023, the American government can lend or lease military equipment, military supplies to Ukraine during the duration of the war. The law also, interestingly, exempted two parts of typical lend-lease. One is there should be a 5-year limit on it. That does not exist. That's gone. And also, the law exempted Ukraine from having to actually pay it all back. The lease agreement, they may not have to pay. The lending, they may not have to pay back. So, listen, I'm a devout Republican. I've been a Republican since the early 80s. And a lot of my friends, Republicans, I disagree with on Ukraine. I'm also a vehement opponent to President Joe Biden. I think President Biden has done well with Ukraine. I don't think he did well at first. I think especially with refugees, they were suffering on the borders, Poland and Romania, and Europe was doing things very quickly to help them. We were not admitting any Ukrainian refugees, but they came up with a good solution. And I think Kendall and I have known each other for a long time. And I agree with Kendall that he's done a pretty good job. The Lend-Lease program, I think, is admirable. What I'm worried about is the way that Russian propaganda is driving a wedge between Republicans. There are many of my friends on the Republican side who repeat what sounds to me like Kremlin talking points. To me, it's very upsetting. I have lived in Russia. I have lived in Ukraine. I'm married into Ukraine. My friend, I was talking to a reporter recently, and the reporter asked me if you could describe the Russian, people say Russian aggression, I would say Russian slaughter. If you could describe the Russian slaughter of Ukraine in one word, what would you use? And I said, blue. And the reporter said, what do you mean by blue? And I said, I think of the Russian slaughter of Ukraine, and I see the color blue. Because every morning, about 3 o'clock in the morning, since February 22nd, I would wake up and my Ukrainian wife would be looking at her phone, trying to discover if her parents and her friends were alive. And my bedroom was blue from the light. I think of the Ukrainian suffering in colors. I can't imagine, I can't even describe how my wife feels. I don't know. Lend-Lease is the least we could do. But what we must do is not, I mean, I think we need to admit we're refugees if they need it, but we need to give the Ukrainians a home to return to. And my friends on the Republican side who disagree with me, to hell with them. That's how I feel.
I also have questions about like what is the main tools of lobbying, because now, for example, in my case, we join many demonstrations for Ukraine. We do a lot of meetings with Department of State, with people from Senate, people from Congress. But yes, we do many statements, many work with media. But what the main tools of lobbying? Because here it's not like in Ukraine or in Eastern Europe. You have procedures, and maybe, for example, some working on procedures, it will be more effective than 10 demonstrations, or 10 demonstrations will be more effective than one letter to your senator from diaspora. Because people from Senate office, they said that you firstly must work with Americans, because Americans must care about it. Americans must send their letters to senators. Americans must work on that with you, because we was elected by Americans firstly, yeah. And secondly, I see that Russia also work a lot in informational campaigns. So I see that Russia invests money to them, like you must care about your society, you must care about gas prices in US, and you must like block this money to Ukraine. So what's the main tools for advocacy for our people, maybe for some groups, so for politicians, for civil society, for journalists, for volunteers? So what tools we must use to be more effective? Because all our people now work a lot, voluntary a lot, to have this result. But sometimes it's result not so quick as we want.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not anything like the expert that could answer. I can talk a little bit about just a personal experience, but you know, when this horrible war started, there were demonstrations in South Florida. South Florida has what might be a surprisingly large Russian-speaking community, and we used to refer to it that way. And of course, since then, it's people more commonly self-identify as Ukrainian extractions, but it's a big community, maybe over 400,000. And there were demonstrations in which the Russians participated, because frankly, nobody in South Florida that I've spoken to supports the war. Russian, American, Kazakh, Cuban, you know, any nationality. But I didn't believe, and I didn't observe that the demonstrations that were occurring were getting much done. We did put together a meeting with a local member of Congress because, you know, again, we have enough Ukrainian Americans as well as Russian Americans who object to the war to register on the radar for a member of Congress. And I don't know how many districts around the United States have that, but we have such districts in South Florida. And, you know, we had a meeting with a member of Congress and I thought it was a good and effective meeting. And at the meeting, it was attended by Ukrainian Americans, including registered voters, because I just find out, at least at the congressional level, and I'm sure this was talked about, the first question they ask is, are you in the district, or who's in the district? They're very, very mindful of that. And even when advocating for clients in immigration context, they always want to know, is the family who's trying to get somebody in from another country in the district. So one of the things I certainly would recommend is wherever there are members of Congress or perhaps senators who have some level of Ukrainian Americans in their district or in their state, you know, set up meetings. And, you know, of course, it's good to have US folks who've been contributing to the members' campaign over the years, but also members of the Ukrainian American community to sit in on meetings, so that kind of impact is magnified.
I've actually been trying to Google here the name of the man who has been lobbying on behalf of the Zelensky administration. I haven't discovered it, but whoever he is, he's doing a good job. Mm-hmm. He's also up against people who are lobbying for Russia, by the way, who are operating as lobbyists in Washington. He's a one-man band versus this group of people who are probably working, as we mentioned, probably for Gazprom or something. He's doing a great job. I don't know who he is, but he's doing a great job. He needs help, unfortunately. I think Kendall's got it right. The American people need to know the story. It can't just be an inside the Beltway discussion, because we're talking billions and billions of dollars at a time when we have so much homelessness in America that it's embarrassing, right? And yet we need to describe for the American people why it's important to stop Vladimir Putin's slaughter of Ukraine. And the way to do that is to talk directly to the families in the congressional districts. And well, I'm from Buffalo, New York, right? Amazingly, we have many, many Ukrainians in Buffalo, many Ukrainians who have been there for, for dozens of years or generations even. And if the congressman there was against this aid, he's not, he's for it. I would put a group of his constituents together to sit down and talk to him about their mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters in Ukraine and whether they're even going to live, right? There's no better way to move an American family to support the foreign aid than to describe for them how another family is being impacted. We don't like spending money in other countries. We don't like lobbyists, right? We don't like even our congressmen. We don't like any of them. Least of all, do we like the media, right? But we love families. And if we can describe not just the war, but the recovery from the war as reuniting families. Because I know many Ukrainians who are now in Poland or in Romania. They're in places where they actually can't afford to live, right? Because they're living on the revenues that they gained and hopefully saved in Ukraine. They want to go home, right? And in order for them to go home, they have to have something to go home to. They have to have hospitals, they have to have schools that have all been burned to the ground, right? So reuniting families is the message that we need to give to the families in the districts of the congressmen who are going to vote. And if we don't do that, we're going to lose this.
Yeah, one more question from me as moderator, and then we come to questions from internet and audience. One more question, it's about suits against Russia. So now many people from Ukraine, even some lawyers like Valentin Zaharia, I'm also working on lobbying law to cancel Russia immunity. What does it mean? It means that if your parliament will vote for that, Ukrainian business and also people who lose their houses or who have very deep trauma like raping women can sue in United States against Russia and have compensation from oligarchs' money here or from Russia assets here. And it's huge money, really. Can you give to us perspective of this idea from the part of lobbying work and from the part also of work of lawyers?
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that a little bit. And Katya just referred to a couple of very important issues. There's a lot of frozen Russian money. I mean, I read different reports. I was looking at something just now that said that there are 7 countries that have collectively $284 billion of frozen Russian money from the Central Bank of Russia. Do a fair amount of the Marshall Plan. I mean, that would certainly be a good down payment of it. And a lot is frozen in the U.S. Apparently, I didn't know this. France and Japan have even more, but the U.S., according to what I'm reading, is about $40 billion. Logically, you might think that there are ways for victims to get access to that money, but it's pretty difficult. The U.S., like pretty much all countries, gives sovereign immunity to foreign countries. And that sovereign immunity means basically you can't sue a foreign government, no matter what they've done, with exceptions that are important and are to get talked about increasingly. And there's an extensive history of lawsuits against foreign governments. Some of them have ultimately not prevailed. Some, such as the victims back in the 80s, there was a Pan Am jet over Scotland that blew up. It was clearly shown to be Libyan terrorists. And over Scotland, of course, everyone on the airplane perished, close to 300 people. That seems like the kind of atrocity that should invite access to courts, but it really took a couple decades to get actual recovery from Libya. There are other examples too. There are lawsuits that have been filed against Iran for its participation in Hezbollah's murder of 200 Marines. Again, the reason I talk about these cases from long ago is because they take a very long time to work their way through the courts. Things could be different this time, but one of the most significant things would be what Kat just talking about. Would the Congress of the United States, with the signature of the president, actually eliminate Russian sovereign immunity? And if so, would that create access to victims? It certainly would, to the assets that are already here in the United States. Or would the United States want to go in a different direction? And either through the Justice Department or through the exercise of executive authority, take control of those assets. Perhaps to repatriate them in some way to Ukraine, perhaps to simply fund some of our own efforts at helping rebuild the battered streets and cities and hospitals and schools. So it's a very large question as to where those frozen assets will end up and how long it will take. But there are certainly possibilities, and there are at least 3 different laws that are being studied. And I would be surprised if litigation initiatives are not launched, but they're complex. To some extent, they will depend on changes in the law, and to some extent, they'll be dependent upon government policy changes and what the United States at the highest levels wants to do with the frozen assets. It's such a difficult landscape to predict that in one of the cases involving victims who are suing Iran, the Congress literally changed the law during the course of the litigation because it was going on for so many years, and there have been successful recoveries against the Castro regime as well. So the short answer is there's a lot of money, there are a lot of victims. Ultimately, how that turns out could depend more on the Congress and the president than on the courts.
I've known Kendall for a long time. We come from opposite sides of the table. When it comes to legal issues, I defer entirely to Kendall. Always. On the Congress, I'll step in to say a few words, take it or leave it. I mentioned earlier about how there are many Republicans who are saying things that I think reflect Russian propaganda. People I truly respect. I'm about Catholic. I'm actually in a master's program for theology right now. I told Donald Trump that, and he looked at me like I was crazy. He's like, "You're going to be a priest?" He's like, "No, I have children." So, but for me, I watched propaganda overtake the Catholic Church. You know, Catholic commentators, we call them traditional Catholic or Twitter Catholics, right? Who are out there saying that we should not be giving money to Ukraine, right? And others who were saying, you sound like the Putinists. I've watched 2 Catholics almost tear each other apart and try to get each other fired. One an academic, one a reporter, over messages that were clearly coming straight out of the Kremlin, to my mind, right? This is not happening in the Congress. The Republicans are remarkably united with Democrats on aid to Ukraine. remarkably. I think this might change. We're going to have about 50 more freshmen Republicans. Some of them are going to come from probably, the wrong side of that debate. It would be great if we could remove immunity before November. It's not going to happen. But I think it's very possible that the Congress can do the right thing. It's remarkably unified. And even if the Republican Congress becomes in charge, the Republicans become in charge of the House and perhaps the Senate, most likely the House, even if they do elect some rather anti-Ukraine, like isolationist Republicans, I think it can still be done. I think it would be unusual, right, Kendall? But I think it's entirely possible. And if we do it, Katie bar the door. I mean, I think that we could really, truly do great things for Ukraine with Russian money, and the poetry of that just makes me very happy.
Yeah, it's now we have damages, $200 billion. It's damages to our infrastructure, to supply chains, to private households, to business. I'm not directly because my father under Russian sanctions and our territory is occupied at Kherson region. So I know it's also from my personal experience, unfortunately. And this also I must mention on this conference, that situation which now we have in Kherson region, it's not so loudly terror like in Bucha, but it's very hidden terror under occupation. It's the same thing like in Bucha, but very high. So they take all activists, they broke in their legs, they kidnap it, they come to houses in villages and take cows and other stuff. So it's the same, unfortunately, in my region where I'm like taking part in election only 5 months ago. So I know these people directly. And if some also Americans who see us wanted to help directly to our people in Kherson, or donate money to them to transfer some way because we can't give their humanitarian aid, please do that. Because people in Ukraine, you must understand that people in villages live for $50 a month. So when they work, so they really need this help now, and we can help. Also, we will present project Ukrainian Humanitarian Headquarters, which connects different projects and fundraising not only for one project, but for different projects. For example, also if religious organizations do these projects like rabbi or priest, we support them. Also, we support people who buy body armor for territorial defense, like people who do psychological aid for raped women. It's true, yeah, and they also need support, because without our support, unfortunately, these programs will be closed, because now it's all money from middle business, and as you know, business also not so good here. So thank you one more time. Please, questions.
When you talk about the colors of the war, to me it's spinning black, because I have a very good friend in Kiev, and on the 4th day of the
Can I bring this to you? I want people to hear it.
So when I think of the war, and you talk about colors, and it's blue for you, to me it's spinning black, because I have a very good friend who lives in Kiev, and on the 4th day of the war, I received luckily an erroneous message that said her apartment complex had been hit by a Russian missile. And it was a tremendous shock for me. And it took me a few days to actually find out that she was still alive, which was then almost like the Ukrainian colors with yellow, it was bright and positive. But I had met with her, and I call it the good old days, which was only in December last year, with her and with the head of the Ukrainian PPP unit at a big international conference on PPPs in Istanbul. And it was so ironic for me where they were presenting on the Ukrainian plan for PPPs to improve the port facilities on the Black Sea to export grain to the rest of the world. 3 cities stand out to me: Mariupol, Kherson, Nikolaev, and then actually a 4th one, Odessa. Only one of those ports today can even function. Yeah. And so when I start thinking of PPPs, which is my area of expertise, I just wonder, and that's the question for the two panelists, the three, is when we get into, and I'm trying to be positive, into the reconstruction phase of Ukraine, this will happen eventually. And in the recovered territories, which I firmly believe will happen, there's going to be a tremendous need for industries, infrastructure companies from all over the world to get involved, and it's most likely going to have to take place through public-private partnerships because the Ukrainian government's not going to have the funding to do this. What type of lobbying do you think should be done, especially with your experience of having been a lobbyist in Hungary, I mean in the Ukraine? What type of lobbying do you think, what effective methods or strategies should be done so that this can be achieved? And that's a very long question.
I can begin the answer, but Kendall probably can do a better job, but I was at a conference, oh gosh, wherever it was, Florida somewhere, where the Biden administration's FEMA director was. I know FEMA doesn't typically get involved in international issues. Sometimes they do. I've seen them on the ground in former Soviet Union. And I asked her, I said, will FEMA get involved in recovery of Ukraine? She said it will almost entirely come from the United States Agency for International Development, but also some will come from the Department of Defense. Those are the two buckets it will come from. So both of them require congressional lobbying. There's existing funds, but not 200 billion. And by the way, of course, the United States is not going to pay the whole bill, but what's going to happen, and this is the way I understand it, is that the Zelensky administration will make a request, and the bills will be paid by foreign governments. But I also think, Kendall, and maybe you know more about this, we've spoken to some friends of ours who say that some of those requests may come from regional governors or cities. For example, a hospital in Bucha, let's say, is leveled to the ground, and why the schools in Bucha are absolutely gone. Why would a family come home? They can't send their children to school, and they can't go to a hospital if they get sick. So if you want to reunite families, those are the things that need to be fixed. Does that come from Zelensky, or does that come from the mayor of Bucha? I mean, it's a very complex question. I'm not quite sure how Ukraine will work on this.
Yeah, so it's also the last question. It's the same question which our members of parliament have. So how it will work, this Marshall's Plan? Because also I understand that we can't now rechange our supply chain, and our business can't take credit for 30%. You know, so nothing work here. So we almost in default. That's why we need this aid from European Union and from United States. So, but how these programs will be? Usually it's not going only to government, because as I know, also United States trying to separate, for example, their direct program to NGOs, program to government, also because of some corruption risks which we have in Eastern Europe, unfortunately. But I think that we also must discuss clearly about these issues, because, for example, from my perspective, we need result. We need not new top-level oligarchs on this money. We need result for people. And now, for example, with the humanitarian aid, we also have situation that it's not moved to villages. So in cities we have this aid. In villages, people have like some potatoes, and that's all. I think that Americans will be very surprised that this, for example, goods come to markets to sell it, or chemicals, or diapers, and so on and so forth. So how it will look like, and how Ukrainians and what stakeholders must take in part in creating this Marshall's Plan. So it's applying of projects, or it's working with municipalities, or how it's working bureaucracy way.
Well, I think it's going to be a huge challenge to avoid the dynamic of everything passing through the current administration with Zelensky. If, regional governments, want to participate, making sure they're getting a fair share and that it's being done in an equitable, relatively corruption-free context, that's going to be a challenge. And on the other side, U.S. businesses are going to be mightily interested in the opportunities that this presents. So how much of the rebuilding is simply going to be controlled by U.S. business interests, all of which have a legitimate desire to participate as actively as possible. It's a major challenge. I wouldn't make any predictions at this point, except that if you are a local government or a city and you want to see something that reaches, the local level, they may have to consider getting their own lobbyists or their own ability to reach through, because otherwise I think it's going to be controlled and managed and administered through Zelensky's office.
I can say something. Which brings to mind my chief concern, and that is corruption in Ukraine. Listen, I'm very concerned about corruption in America right now, right? And I've worked throughout the former Soviet Union. I've never been in a country that's not corrupt in the former Soviet Union. Russia makes Ukraine look like a dream. But the American people, all we hear about because of the Russian propaganda that's being regurgitated by people who should know better, we hear all about Ukrainian corruption and how we're giving money and it's just being stolen. There's a Ukrainian corruption problem. And so if we have the Zelensky administration in charge of dispersing international funding, I think that the corruption problem needs to be fixed. I mean, when we put out the $36 billion that our own Congressman Rand Paul stood up and said, I'm stopping this because there is no control on this. There's no inspector general on this. People called me up and said, call his office, Michael, and tell him that he's wrong. I said, he's not wrong. I mean, I didn't want him to stop the 40 billion, whatever it was, $30 billion, but I also didn't want it to go there completely without any controls. When I was in Moscow, money came from the International Monetary Fund. It was wired without any controls to Moscow, and it bounced over to Cyprus in 5 minutes. It was gone, right? This is what the American people fear. The corruption that is endemic in the former Soviet Union, corruption that we have in our own country, and seeing their tax dollars stolen when we have homeless on the streets in this country. That's what we're worried about. I want to say one more thing, because I know you're going to end it right now.
No, how we can fight with it, because we also, sometimes it's not only about corruption, it's about management issues.
I think it's oversight.
For example, with humanitarian aid, it's also bigger part of this, it's wrong government management.
I think it's oversight. I think it's multinational oversight.
Yeah.
The American people should not be in charge in the way that Ukraine spends its money. But if we're going to be putting $200+ billion as a global community into Ukraine, there should be an inspector general, right? It should be a multinational organization. I don't trust anyone in particular, but maybe it's a new one we put together, because this Marshall Plan, this Lend-Lease, whatever we're going to call the war component, but the recovery component in the Marshall Plan needs to be controlled. But I want to say one more thing. I'm very concerned about the split in the Republican Party over support for Ukraine. It bothers me. Sometimes it keeps me awake at night. I'm really grouchy when I don't get sleep. I'm very concerned about this. And the reason why my Republican friends are against Ukraine has really nothing to do with Ukraine. It has everything to do with the fact that they hate Joe Biden, right? Joe Biden favors Ukraine, then I must oppose Ukraine. And George Soros, who Republicans were very concerned about George Soros is in favor of Ukraine, then I must be against Ukraine. That's called tribalism, right? It's a disordered way to look at the world. It's wrong. And any one of my friends in the Republican Party who is looking at this like a tribe, they need to rethink what they're doing. They need to look at their soul, because if we want to continue to be a member of the family of man, we need to stop Putin's slaughter. And when it's stopped, we need to reunite the families.
Thank you for the for conclusions, and we also have some Zoom conclusions also from Anna Skorokhod. She is member of Ukrainian Parliament, and she always work in the like zero level, you know, with military, our military heroes. So she will add her position and some video and conclusions. Also, we will share, of course, it with all structures. Maybe some roadmap what we must do in Marshall's Plan and in lobbying of Ukraine, because you know we need to understand what methods directly useful. Because now I see that it's very separated. Government do one thing, NGOs do other thing. People from business pay the last money for example, body arms, but they can take it in procedure from international aid. So it's a little mess. It's a little house, yeah, in this situation. But in Ukraine, many talented people who can go by procedure and represent their ideas. But I also watch all discussion about Marshall's Plan, but it's theoretical. It's discussion like what economic model we must have, or how not only export like materials by do some new industrialization in Ukraine, but it's not about 1, 2, 3. And also we understand that when we have, I hope, win in this war, we will have the next elections and the next election, and in Ukraine public policy not stable. So how do result for our country? Because all these lives also must give to our future generation, to our kids also better life. So people can't live for $50 a month in villages in almost slavery. So how we must do this economical model and start it right now to have this money most effective and to give to kids in every villages new possibilities, like your kids here in the United States, good school, good medical services, and so on and so forth. So can you give us a little roadmap?
I'm going to let Michael go first.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
I mean, so your comments were actually inspiring. So
I thought that was all that needed to be said, but I can say this, it's a dream, you know? There are people in the United States that still are dreaming for this, the idea of good medical care and good schools, because it's not as great here as the international community thinks it is. However, it's much better here than places like Ukraine, where Vladimir Putin has slaughtered the entire nation and leveled entire cities. And it's not, see, the thing with Americans is that we don't even know, we couldn't even find Ukraine on the map. We are people in the United States who can't find Europe on the map. We don't look outside of our nation, right? It's the truth, it is. And there are so many people out there talking about the Nazis and Azov and Zelensky being a billionaire and all these things. They couldn't even spell Ukraine in February, right? The problem we have in America is to give the Ukrainians what they deserve as humans, not as Ukrainians, as humans. There are people in America who believe that we don't have those things, right? I believe that the Marshall Plan is a brand, right? It's a brand that's understood by people who are older than 60 or 70. This needs to be rebranded, right? We need to talk about the fundamental nature of what needs to be done. We need to brand it, try to get a lobbyist in the United States to sell a 25-year-old congressman the Marshall Plan for Ukraine. The first thing they're going to have to do is teach him what the Marshall Plan was.
It's true. No, I mean economy booster and.
But we can just,
yeah, and
the whole thing
growth,
needs to
yeah.
needs to come from the bottom. And we need to establish what needs to be done. We need to make people in the United States understand what that is, and we need to give it a brand. Maybe we'll call it the Katya Plan, right? But whatever it is, the problem we have in the United States is, and I think all over the world, is the economy is going into the toilet. And in order to think that the Ukrainian people should be brought out of the war, we need to understand that there are people here who feel like they're in their own war.
Yeah.
Right.
Because it's our global task. It's
Yeah.
not only about Ukraine. You can see that situation in Ukraine, it's connect with supply chains all over the world. Because it's also connect with China policy, with we haven't time for it today, yeah, but it's very global. And even it's connect with China policy in Africa, and it's all connected. That's why Kendall, your conclusion and
So let's call it the Kendall Plan.
No, but I do think that from a political strategy standpoint, lobbying strategy, which is what we're joining forces on today, we've got to go back to Michael's point that the American public's knowledge of the rest of the world is usually embarrassingly weak. And it was certainly true of Ukraine until this tragic, awful war began. And it remains, other than, people see the military action, they're aware of atrocities. So there's a general awareness, but in terms of what to do about it, if you tell the average American member of Congress, oh, we've got a pretty good Marshall Plan here, the public's going to be fine with that. There isn't going to be any intervention to address some of the things that Kateryna was talking about. So what I think needs to be a critical element of the political strategy is identifying some members of Congress who will make it their business to make sure that this is handled in a meaningful way that doesn't turn into a media circus on corruption. So for example, especially if the country is struggling economically and the aid starts flowing into Ukraine, and if some journalists expose how money is being misspent or wasted or basically stolen, that's going to freeze the enthusiasm for further support for Ukraine. So I think it's important to recognize that right now there's a lot of positive feeling that could turn sour quickly, especially if our own economy starts to struggle, if some of the aid that's being furnished ends up in the wrong hands. And so I think it's important to get some members of Congress committed to making sure we have a Marshall Plan that is not just a giveaway without accountability. And that those members of Congress are likely to be people that have Ukrainian Americans in their district. Perhaps there's a senator or two who will join. But you don't need 100 of them. You just need some that are informed, that will follow through, that will make it a priority in their political and personal lives to help Ukraine in a way that's truly meaningful.
Thank you, and thank you for this conversation to all participants of our side discussion and our 6th annual International Government Relations meetings. We also have some programs and some quotes from Anna Skorokhod. She is a member of Ukrainian Parliament. Fortunately, she can't come, but she will be moderated by Dina, and I pass the word to Dina, and also Dina will have conclusions also from Central Asia, from Kazakhstan, and Abdul Patel. He also propose us to do the next discussion about government relations and situation in Africa. So maybe our community also think about it. So Dina, I will pass this question to you, and please moderate the last part of our discussion by Zoom. Yeah, thank you a lot, and thanks to all journalists who help us, and to all participants, and to all our big internet audience. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kateryna. So we will proceed with Anna's speech. Anna is a Ukrainian politician, human rights activist, and a lawyer. And she's also founder of the public organization called Association of Mothers of Ukraine. Okay, right now I'm going to share. I'm sorry, could you please give me the access to sharing the screen? Okay. Share the screen. Okay. Because we want to okay, show some videos. Okay. Okay, it's on right now.
Це тут 400 людей, так, тримали?
Да. Трошки 400 не було, 300. До 400.
300 з копійками.
Тут сиділо, тут склалося, тут сиділо.
Це село сюди в один підвал зігнали?
Да.
А люди погибали из-за задушки, да, получается?
Не хватало, старий людей не хватало. Ось тут. Оце кроватки, дві такі. 8 діток спали на цій кроватці, і мамка ще була. Ось тут жінка в воді, трохи більше, було груді кормилися. Отам углу теж 6 наших дітей, це діток ще жили, а дитяті тому місяць було тільки.
Ви разом з ними туди були?
Так, це ж тут, оце скамейка по скамейці було. Це такочки, отак сидиш, спиш, сидять. А ночі, щоб проснуться, ноги затіпли. Да, щоб будинок просто так не протягне ноги був. Тому на голову можна наступити, тому на живо.
І скільки так жили люди?
Місяць.
Місяць.
Послухали їх.
Переважно
19 людей, 9 з них діти. Жили оці в морі.
Холодно було?
Тут, так, тут зараз дуже холодно. Дуже холодно. В коридорі 55 людей, діти 7. Місяць.
Так они выпускали их, уранці відкривають, у 7 часов в туалеті. А такочки такое відра поставив, там ось сидить, що входить в туалет,
А переважно хто? Жінки і діти, да, були? Чи чоловіки були?
Усі були діти, жінки, діти.
Дітки розвивалися, хрестики, ноги кидали. Це двері ті, що тут написано було. Ось третій.
Це хто помер тут?
Да. Це кого вбили, якого?
Застрелений. Наш Славик, цей снаряд зорвався, розірвало. Шевченковича застрелений.
А скільки років приблизно їм було?
Ну, десь 40. Гришко теж коло 50 тисяч, 62, досить такий Шевченковича, 50 десь. Це його рідний брат. Ну, бачили, як його держали, тероризували, Ну, діло в тому, що його могили не знайшли, не знаю. А це виковиці у погребі вбитих понаходили. Оце ті, що наче стріляли. А це ті, що вмирали.
Від задухи, да?
Да.
Где метеорит рисовали, там, наверное, хотели, чтобы здесь немножко не футболки. Футболку, да, показали еще. Це перше число наші прийшли. Конечно. Я думаю, это люди самые знаковые события. Так и люди умирали, их давали хоть похоронить здесь или нет?
Похоронить.
Ну вот во время, пока они
Потім
здесь.
кочегарку заносили, 3 чоловіки, чи собереться. Перших понесли, дали добровольність захоронити, пошли діти хоронити, викопали яму, їхня машина приїхали, обстріл почався, зятя ранило дочку, ранило, в них 3 чоловік поранені, у яму просто землею прикидали від снаряду тих. І так вони залишилися.
И все похороны, да?
І оце таке. А то є по одному, то там, то там. Я до пуття не до пуття було не похоронити. У нас тут батюшка жив, свій був такий, так то придали.
Right, and the next video. Mhm. Okay, Anna.
Yep, thank you. Unfortunately, you have to understand that what's happening in Ukraine, it's not movie or it's not a computer game. It's reality. It's our day-by-day reality since the 24th of February. And you have to understand that during we are reaching time to discuss about a lot of different stuff. Ukraine pay a very high cost for it because every day we are losing territories, we are losing, and this is most important, we are losing 600 lives each day. And it's too much and it's insane in 21st century. I can understand that USA is far from Ukraine and maybe you can find it on a map. Even you can find Europe on a map as I heard previously. But if you want to find it in the future, everybody have to understand that first of all, we need weapons. We can't talk about rebuilding now. We can't talk about money now because first of all, we need, and our Ukrainian armed forces, they need weapons, and they need weapons what they ask, because nowadays during the land lease, we are waiting from USA the weapon like large caliber guns, like MLRS, like air defense systems, ISVS, APCS, and you have to know that during the bureaucratic way and reaching time for doing different bureaucratic stuff, we're losing too much life every day, each day. And I know that it's very complicated to understand what happens if you are not involved. But you have to know that nowadays we can't even talk about human rights in Ukraine. Unfortunately, I've just come back from the European Union Ukrainian Parliamentary Association Committee, and I find that war in Ukraine nowadays isn't a main daily news line. And I see that the most what everybody worry about, it's food, fuel, and migration crisis. But I know that everyone may be tired of war, but it's not stopped, and it's really crazy. And you have to know that since the war started, I'm all the time on the first line. I know what is bombing. I know what is lay down under artillery, and I know what is losing friends in few seconds, or you just talk to people, and in few seconds you can find their bodies like a mess. So as for me, it's my pain also day by day, and I want to ask USA now, please don't use time like you're using it now. It's too expensive. It's too expensive for Ukraine. And if you really want to help us, please give us weapons, first of all. And only after win, we can talk about renovation. And nowadays, you can find that, okay, a lot of territories are free now, but we don't know what can happen in the future, in few days. We don't know what can happen in 1 month. So these questions, I guess we have to talk about after win. And first of all, I will repeat and repeat, please give us weapons, what our army needs. And yes, corruption is still in Ukraine. Yes, a lot of questions to our government, but during the situation, I can be sure that you will find Ukrainians, our politicians, united like never before. So we don't care about our fights, about our fights before, and maybe now there is a lot of things happening in Ukraine, in Ukrainian politician life, which are unacceptable at normal life, at normal times. But I guess it's not time to talk about it. Now we have to understand, and we have to help each other. We have to support each other, and we have to understand that all crises will be worse if Ukraine will be occupied, if territories of Ukraine will be occupied. So we have to do something, not talking, and not discussion. It's too expensive. I will repeat it again and again, because